I imported a couple of copies of the Vancer Gretxa from TaoBao early this year, but hadn't really had a chance to properly use them until recently. As far as I'm aware, the Gretxa is the first mouse BTL and Vancer have put together, and it's quite an interesting release, boasting wireless, a lightweight shell and a top tier sensor. As far as specs go, it's around 70 grams, so a very respectable weight in the wireless space for a mouse of its size, being closer to the 74 gram Viper Ultimate than something like the 60 gram Hearty S Wireless. The mouse is available in a variety of coatings and finishes, and whilst the metallic red and blue are the newer batch 2 releases, I think the mocha cream raw plastic on the original feels better in hand and quite close to the final mouse Ultralight 2 Cape Town. The metallic red is a little budget feeling, and the overall finish on the paint job is quite amateur, with a lot of overspray visible on the inner shell and some areas of the mouse either not entirely covered or not sprayed at all, as you can see on my mouse 1 and mouse 2. I custom painted my original batch 1 mouse for a blacked out finish. I was curious to see what it would look like, and overall I'm pretty happy with the results. I did take the time, and it seems like the coverage on my paint job is actually better than the factory finish on my metallic red. The Gretxa ships with Omron 20M main switches, and they really aren't the best implementation that I've felt, with a lot of pre-travel and really limited feedback. I added KLGM 8.0s on both of my copies as a way to resolve this and improve tactility. The side switches were also kind of mushy, so I swapped them for Japanese Omrons to reduce pre-travel. It also sharpened them up quite a bit. Here's how the switches sound in both of my copies after I swapped them over. As expected from a 3370, the sensor performed excellently with no tracking issues or spinouts on a variety of different mouse surfaces. The battery life also held up well at around 2 to 3 weeks, but unfortunately it uses a very large 500 mAh unit to achieve these durations, which adds significant avoidable weight to the mouse. I kept the large stock battery in my black painted mouse, but opted to downsize to a 100 mAh battery in the metallic red, shaving off around 8 grams and reducing the weight from approximately 71 grams down to about 62 grams, with absolutely no compromise or permanent alterations to the mouse that couldn't be reversed. The 100 mAh battery delivers about 15 hours battery life at 1000 Hz pole rate, so as long as I remember to plug it in to a USB-C cable overnight, it never impacted my usage in the testing period. The unboxing experience was very modest. The more recent batches came with an RGB branded receiver, whilst the originals shipped with a plain case on the receiver dongle. They're both kinda cheap looking to me, but I'll leave it up to you to decide which is more attractive on the desk, either the RGB or the plain. The charging cable was a real surprise here, being soft, flexible and absolutely good enough to game within a pinch. It's actually that good that I found myself using it with other USB-C mice, so it's a real plus here for something that's usually neglected on wireless products or relegated to even a rubber cable or stiff braided cable at best. Outside of the functional necessities for the mouse to operate, the only other accessory you're given is a spare set of skates. As a PSA for everyone, there is a clear transparent film fitted over the skates that come on the mouse and the spare skates that you absolutely need to peel before usage. It's not immediately apparent, usually it's either a blue or coloured plastic film, so it's easy to see. I hadn't seen anyone else call this out, so I'm just trying to do the Lord's work here and make sure that no one is using their mouse with plastic covers over their skates. Regardless, I didn't really get on with the stock skates and would absolutely suggest that you consider looking at aftermarket options from someone like Core Pads. I know that they're available in both North America and on the German site for EU. They'll really help you get the best out of your mouse. The stock skates are quite small and scratchy. At the time that I purchased my mice, there were no aftermarket skates available, so instead I sanded the base flat and used some spares that I happened to have laying around that fit the mice. The Gretxa has limited onboard control for pole rate and DPI both being adjustable with buttons, but for debounce and any other further customization, you'll want to use their software. Unfortunately, this is not easy to locate. There is no functional link in the guide that I could see or on the mouse box. The manufacturer's website seems to be unavailable, and there's only a sparse collection of Google Drive links from retailers to sometimes outdated versions of the software. I was provided updated software and firmware fixes for this mouse from a Reddit user, Bumper99, who managed to acquire it directly from the manufacturer in China. This really should be made more widely available, as it has some useful additional features like debounce time alterations and disabling the pretty obnoxious hibernation mode. I've added a link to both the latest firmware and software files in the description down below. Both of my copies also shipped with a lot of rattle inside, the first being down to a loose DPI button housing which I was able to secure in place with aluminium tape, and the second because of a 1mm spacer PCB placed under the scroll wheel switch to lift it up, which had not been secured with solder. Again, being a more advanced user, I was able to correct this. But even with these alterations, I have not been massively impressed by my time with the Gretxa. Whilst it isn't a bad mouse and I was able to play relatively consistently with it, I don't know that it made my game any better or gave me much aim confidence like I'd feel with a mouse that I'm really comfortable with or happy to use. What I did notice through use was how close the shape of this mouse felt to the HK Gaming Sirius-M, a wired mouse released around the same time for a slightly lower price tag. Now, neither mouse have particularly great QC from my experience, and whilst I typically would not ever suggest an HK Gaming product, it does provide a similar experience for people on a stricter budget who really click with the size of the Gretxa but can't stretch to the $80 to $105 that it currently retails for. Now, to wrap things up in terms of the pros, it's a bit divisive, but I kinda like the unique playing card cutout design. It's a nice aesthetic, and the mouse is available with some interesting colour options as well. BTL have also delivered a premium sensor with the 3370. This really should be the gold standard for wireless mice. It performs excellently and should be what other manufacturers look to use moving forward. Size-wise, the mouse fits between the Viper Mini and Ultimate and provides a similar shape for people who want something maybe a bit smaller than the Razer Viper Ultimate but don't want to give up the freedom of wireless. It could also provide a suitable road test for people on the fence about picking up a Final Mouse Starlight 12 Medium, being a very comparable size to that mouse as well. Finally, whilst I don't think it's an amazing mouse out the box, there is some potential for improvement through simple modding or the purchase of aftermarket products like skates. Conversely, I think that there's significant room for improvement with the Gretxa. Firstly, build quality. The shaking, the rattling, the poor paint finish, these are all things that could easily be picked up in quality control, and these did not need to be sent to users in this state. The quality may have been improved in more recent batches, but my batch 1 and batch 2 products really weren't where I would have expected them to be. Next, battery size. The 500 mAh is way over budget for this mouse and drives the weight up unnecessarily. A 250 mAh would be a decent compromise, likely offering around 40 to 50 hours of use and shaving 5 grams off the mouse. Future revisions could benefit from considering this trade-up, saving weight with absolutely no compromise to the functionality, the form, or the usage of the mouse. I also think the lack of click tactility and significant post-travel came from bad click tensioning rather than the switches themselves. I don't think KAL 8.0 are a magic bullet, but I do think they could have gone a long way in improving click feedback to compensate for the poor button tensioning on this mouse. As mentioned, the skates are very small and were quite scratchy on multiple surfaces. Batch 1 also included a sensor ring which seemed to have been removed on future batches. I would consider aftermarket skates or a sanding base mod compulsory purchases with this mouse, so bear that in mind when you're budgeting this purchase. Next, software and firmware wide availability. BTL and Vancer absolutely need to provide a domain where this is hosted and regularly updated. G-Drive sharing of various versions through storefronts and Reddit of unknown exe files really is not an acceptable way for a mouse now being sold by major retailers to distribute their firmware and software. Finally, and to conclude, I'd like to talk about what I think is the Achilles heel of the Gretxa, and that's the price. I struggle to reach a verdict on the Gretxa. On the one hand, it is a pretty viable mouse with some competitive potential through user modding. On the other hand, this really isn't a budget mouse, and the customer should not be expected to mod to get something competitive. When I'm considering a mouse like the Delux M800 for example, which is about half the price of the Gretxa, I'll go in with lower expectations and absolutely be prepared to plug some gaps because of how affordable and great value that product is. I paid 400 and 470 Chinese yuan for my copies delivered from TaoBao, which was around $60 each, and for me at least, this felt absolutely at the upper end of what was reasonable to ask for this product. The Gretxa presently retails for anywhere between $80 on the low end to as high as $105 from X-Ray Pad, which in all honesty really is far too much to ask for the mouse that you get out the box. Over the past 2 weeks, we've seen significant price drops from top tier companies. Most notably, the Razer Viper Ultima is now available for as low as $90 without a dock, which is incomparable in build quality to the Gretxa. To me, the Gretxa can best be summarised as a case of right mouse, wrong time. If it was dropped 18 months ago, it would have filled a gap in the market between budget and premium mice and absolutely had space to thrive. We've seen major price cuts on older flagship mice like the SteelSeries Aerox 3, the Razer Viper Ultimate, or more budget wireless options entering the market like the Razer Orochi V2, the Glorious Model O, or the aforementioned Delux M800. Whilst I don't really rate either mouse as a top tier offering, and the M800 still has compromises, specifically a 33-35 sensor and pretty abysmal stock side buttons, the shape, weight and overall feel in hand isn't really all that different of an experience from using the Gretxa, and it's over half the price, found as low as $35 on AliExpress or $45 on Amazon at time of recording. I really don't know what space the Gretxa exists in anymore. It is too expensive to be a budget recommendation, whilst at the same time being too inconsistent to be considered a premium flagship product. The Gretxa has potential, and I do hope that BTL find a way to either improve the areas of concern that I've discussed or reduce the price by approximately $30 to $40, but for now, for me at least, unfortunately I do not think that the Gretxa is good enough.